Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the Daily Hindu News Analysis. So before we begin today's discussion, we have a few important announcements. Yesterday, UPSC brought out the notification. In fact, we even brought out a video yesterday explaining the notification and how to fill the form. So as part of your upcoming prelims examination, we shall be launching a comprehensive program for your prelims. So we shall be starting Conquer Prelims 2024 to assist you in preparing for the upcoming prelims examination. This shall be a comprehensive program absolutely free on our YouTube channel. All you have to do is subscribe to our channel. The idea is to make this channel a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Under Conquer Prelims, we shall be covering 100 most important static topics as part of prelims fundamentals. We shall also have a PYQ marathon where we will discuss the previous question papers of the last 11 years, and this would be a subject-wise discussion. And finally, the much-awaited prelims crash course for 2024 will also be brought out somewhere between mid-April to May. So the dates will be communicated very soon. Just hold on and please ensure that you subscribe to the channel so that you can comprehensively cover the static topics, the previous year questions and the current affairs needed for the upcoming prelims examination. Then also note that our online classroom program for 2025 has already started from 13th of Feb. So those interested in enrolling can contact the number given over here. And as part of the free special classes that we are offering on the Unacademy app, this is going to be the schedule of the classes for today. So please take a look at this and you can attend these sessions on the app, and the links for these sessions is also provided in the video description. So with this, let's start with the discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of The Hindu, I have chosen a total of 6 articles. There are 3 articles that require a detailed analysis and 3 small articles that are relevant for the prelims exam. So let's examine these articles one by one, starting with the first article on page number 1. On the front page itself, the article that I have picked, it deals with the farmers' protest which is underway on the outskirts of Delhi. Over the last 2 days, the headlines has been dominated by the Delhi Chalo March, which has been launched by several farmers' organizations. And the farmers, particularly in northern and northwestern India, they have raised several demands and they expect the central government to fulfill these demands in order to address the challenges facing our agrarian sector. The government of India has reacted to these events. In fact, most farmers who are from Punjab, who are protesting, leading these protests, they have been stopped at the Haryana border itself. Some of the farmers who are protesting in Haryana and also on the outskirts of Noida in western UP, they have been barricaded and blockaded on the outskirts of Delhi in order to prevent them from reaching the national capital. So this brings back memories of the large-scale farmer protests that the country witnessed a few years ago in 2020-2021, when the controversial farm laws were proposed by the Modi government. It generated large-scale protests in the same region from Punjab, Haryana, UP, even parts of Rajasthan, etc. And finally, the government of India backed down and it had withdrawn those controversial farm bills. Back then, the protests were led by a different set of farmer organizations and leaders. This time, a few splinter groups of those farmer organizations with a new leadership, they are leading the protests. Between the current protests and the protests that we saw in 2020-2021, there are some common demands, but however, the current set of farmers' protests is seen as an entirely different movement, where farmers are demanding for their rights to be protected and they're trying to pressurize the center through these tactics. In response, the police, the security agencies have reacted quite aggressively. The government of India has been criticized for these aggressive security measures as well. because there have already been clashes between farmers and the police forces. Several farmers have been injured. Apparently, drones have been used as well to fire tear gas shells from the air. So around the national capital and near the Punjab-Haryana border, be it at the Singhu border point, the Shambu border checkpost, even a Tikri border checkpost, very aggressive defensive measures have been put in place, as you can see in this image over here. From multiple concrete blocks to barbed wires to metal spikes to prevent the entry of people and vehicles. Several aggressive measures have been taken in order to prevent the entry of farmers towards the national capital. Even trenches are being dug up all across the outskirts of Delhi, and this has completely disrupted normal life in Delhi, parts of Haryana, and along these border areas. So this brings up the question as to why these farmers are protesting. What is their demand? What really plagues India's agriculture? There are a set of 12 specific demands that these farmer organizations have raised. In fact, the protest, it's led by several groups, several pressure groups representing farmers' interests. As I told you, the leadership role is by a splinter group, which earlier, the parent organization which earlier had led the 2020-21 protests against the farm laws. So the leadership is different, the organizations are slightly different, but there are some common demands that you can see between the current protests and the previous protests. So currently, around 250 farmer organizations have come together under the leadership of this one splinter organization, and they've raised 12 specific demands. So first, let's take a look at the demands, and then we will analyze an editorial from today's newspaper. Today, we have an editorial that examines the farmers' protests, the options available for the government, and the editorial also suggests a way forward. So let's examine this, but first let's understand what are the farmers demanding. What are the 12 demands raised by the farmer organizations? Demand number 1 is related to MSP, minimum support price. They have demanded the government of India to legally guarantee MSP for all crops as recommended by the Dr. Swaminathan Commission's report. See, in India, MSP plays a critical role in our agriculture sector. The minimum support price, which is announced by the government, it's a guaranteed price, a minimum guaranteed price at which the government will procure the crops and the food grains that are produced. The Food Corporation of India, which builds the buffer stock of India to ensure the country's food security, procures food crops and crops that are produced at these minimum prices that are set by the government. So the demand of the farmers is that the MSP prices have to be increased and all the crops have to be covered, and there should be a law. Right now, there is no legal backing for MSP. There's no legal guarantee that MSP will be provided. It's merely through a government policy that MSP is currently being provided. So right now, farmers want the central government to enact a law, thus giving legal guarantee for minimum support prices covering all crops as recommended by the Swaminathan Commission. Now, this demand might seem to be a little unreasonable as well, because the policy of MSP, even though it had several advantages, even today it has several advantages, it still raises many concerns. There are many drawbacks associated with the policy of providing minimum support prices. One major problem is that when MSPs are provided for certain crops, it ends up incentivizing only those variety of crops. Let's say, for example, wheat. If a higher MSP is set for wheat, farmers tend to grow more wheat, increasing India's wheat production, leading to a surplus, and this could lead to a crash in prices. This could also have a detrimental environmental impact, because this could lead to the cultivation of certain types of crops. Monocropping could become the norm, and the agricultural diversity in the country might be lost. The other smaller crops might be neglected. Farmers may not grow them as there is no incentive, but they might focus only on these MSP crops. And this is what has happened in the past. And also, MSP policy in a way is flawed because of the regional variation seen in the impact of MSP. Only certain states, certain regions have benefited from MSP, and farmers have made a very good livelihood for themselves. Regions have been uplifted, whereas many other regions, many farming communities have been left behind. If you look at the biggest benefit from MSP, it's been largely cornered by some states like Punjab, Haryana, etc. Whereas in other parts of the country, you don't see the same kind of impact. So there is a regional variation as well with regard to the benefits that have been seen in the farming sector. Plus, there could be a detrimental environmental impact, as I was mentioning. Since farmers will be encouraged to produce a certain variety of crop, increase productivity, they might use more fertilizers, more irrigation facilities would be created by the state government as well, right? And overusage of water and fertilizers could harm the environment, the ecosystem, leading to pollution. It could degrade the soil. It could pollute our water bodies, including the underground water table. So there are serious environmental consequences as well with regard to promoting certain category of crops. So MSP as a policy has also been allegedly misused for political reasons, especially to please the electorate during election years. Various ruling parties have often increased MSP prices of certain crops to benefit certain states and certain regions so that they can impress the voters and corner those votes. So it's often seen as a populist measure as well. But at the same time, MSP has indeed played a big role in transforming India's agriculture, in increasing India's agricultural productivity, and in protecting the livelihood of farmers. Because it guarantees a minimum support price. Despite all the market fluctuations, even if the market price were to crash, farmers are guaranteed a minimum price. This protects their livelihood, right? And it guarantees a minimum income for the farmers. But however, there is another challenge with MSP, which is related to WTO. At the World Trade Organization, India is already under a lot of pressure, and India stands accused of breaching the WTO norms when it comes to food subsidies. Within the WTO, some of the developed countries and the large developing nations, which are part of the Keynes group, this includes countries like Australia, Brazil, Canada, and others. These countries, along with United States, they have often accused India of providing unfair subsidies to the farming sector, which is basically a reference to MSP prices that we provide. And they have called this as market distorting. They call the MSP policy of India, right, as unfair trade practice and market distorting trade practice. India says that MSP support is necessary in a developing nation like India to guarantee food security. Because it is through MSP that India is able to deliver the commitments under the National Food Security Act. This program is crucial for the Food Corporation of India to build up its buffer stock and deliver the required food grains for public distribution under the PDS system. So as far as India is concerned, MSP plays a big role, not just in supporting our agriculture sector and farmers and their livelihood, right? It also helps in ensuring food security in the country. It is critical for running the National Food Security Program. But through WTO, India stands accused of breaching the subsidy cap that has been placed, and India is often criticized by many developed countries and by the Keynes group of countries that our MSP policies, our food subsidy policies are market distorting, and it is even affecting global movement of agricultural commodities and the supply of agricultural commodities. So this is where India faces a lot of pressure. So in that regard, it's highly unlikely that the government will concede to this demand of the farmers. Also, this could become a huge burden on the government's exchequer, because eventually the payments will come out of the tax revenue raised by the government, right? It is through the people's taxes which is collected, through which MSP policy will be eventually implemented. So this could drain the exchequer as well. These food subsidies could drag down the Indian economy, right? And it could significantly increase the fiscal deficit. So it's highly unlikely that the government is going to accept this, and it is seen as an unreasonable, unviable demand. But that is exactly what the farmers want. They want implementation of Swaminathan Commission's report and extension of MSP with a legal guarantee covering almost all crops. Next, they are asking for debt waiver for farmers and as well as for agricultural laborers. Since farmers are under a lot of distress, they would have borrowed loans from scheduled commercial banks, from cooperative societies, agricultural societies, or maybe even from money lenders. So quite often farmers will not be able to repay the loans due to crop failure and it pushes farmers into a debt burden, and eventually many farmers end up committing suicides as a result of the high debt burden. So farmers are demanding that standing agricultural loans, right, they have to be waived off entirely by the government for farmers and agricultural laborers. That is, farm laborers who work in agricultural fields. Usually in India, farm laborers are landless peasants. They themselves don't own land, or even if they have some land, it would be very fragmented, and there will be no position to repay these loans. So they're demanding that loans taken by farmers and agricultural laborers who are landless peasants, those loans have to be waived off. The debt has to be waived off. The third demand is related to land acquisition. They are demanding the reintroduction of the Land Acquisition Act of 2013 across India, and they want the compensation amount to be increased if agricultural land is acquired for public projects. The demand of the farmers is that they want the compensation to be increased at least 4 times the existing rates, and they want the nationwide implementation of the Land Acquisition Act. This has been another major demand because in several parts of the country, farmers have been losing their agricultural land. For example, if you look at Western UP, the Jewar airport is coming up on the outskirts of Noida. The Yamuna Expressway is being built. So all these large projects involves a lot of land acquisition. And in many cases, it's farmland, agricultural land which will be acquired. So farmers' allegation is that they're not being adequately compensated because they're not only losing their property, their agricultural land, but they lose their livelihood as well. So without adequate education and adequate skills, they won't be able to find alternate employment and alternate jobs. So their livelihood, their whole family's existence is under threat. So they're demanding higher compensation for such projects. In Haryana as well, there are large projects such as laying of power cables. These projects have taken up a lot of farmland and agricultural land. It has been acquired from farmers, and they are worried that they are not going to be adequately compensated. So this demand can be seen in multiple states, particularly in Haryana, UP, even in parts of Rajasthan and Punjab, and that's why they are demanding the implementation of this act across the country with increased compensation, at least 4 times the existing collector rate. Then coming to the next demand, the fourth demand. When the last round of farmers' protests took place in 2020-2021 against the controversial farm laws that was introduced by the Modi government, during these protests, there were a lot of violent incidents. One particular incident was the Lakhimpur Kheri massacre. Protesting farmers in Western UP, they were run over by a SUV driven by one of the drivers of a local politician, and several farmers were killed in this horrific incident. Essentially, some politicians of the ruling class, right, they had targeted the farmers who were protesting against the government, leading to this massacre. So farmers are now demanding justice for those victims. They want the perpetrators to be punished. Even till date, the perpetrators of the Lakhimpur Kheri massacre have not been punished. So farmers are demanding justice for those who lost their lives. They're also demanding compensation to be given to them. They want all the farmer families who lost their family members during the Delhi agitation 3 years ago to be compensated and offered a job to protect those families. This is another demand, largely on humanitarian grounds. Apart from that, they are also raising one more demand, which is very, very unreasonable, and it's highly unlikely that it can ever be met. See, demand number 4 and 7 is completely understandable. This is something that can be delivered. Punishing those perpetrators of targeted violence against farmers, compensating those families which lost their family members during the farmers' protests. This is something the government can ensure. But however, the fifth demand is very unreasonable, very similar to the MSP demand. They are demanding that India should withdraw from WTO and impose a ban on all free trade agreements or FTAs. You can understand why they are raising this concern against WTO and FTAs, but it is highly unlikely that India can ever comply with this demand. See, there are few FTAs, free trade agreements, which have adversely affected India's producers and manufacturers. For example, if you look at India-ASEAN FTA, as part of Look East Act East policy, we have a free trade agreement with Southeast Asian countries, right, with the ASEAN group that represents the 10 Southeast Asian countries. Under the India-ASEAN FTA, it is seen that the trade agreement has largely benefited ASEAN nations more than India. Even though our exports has increased to Southeast Asian countries, today we are importing more from ASEAN region. There has been a flood of cheap products, cheap agricultural products, cheap manufactured goods, which have flooded the Indian market, and this threatens domestic producers. For example, because of the India-ASEAN FTA, there has been a flood of coconut-based products and coffee products from Southeast Asian countries. From Vietnam, cheaper coffee has flooded the Indian market, and this has affected coffee producers in Karnataka. Coconut products from Thailand, Indonesia have flooded the Indian market, and this has hit the coconut industry, particularly in Kerala. So there are many such examples where domestic producers, farmers, manufacturers are hit, and they're not able to compete with the cheaper imports that are coming in, which are of better quality. So generally, farmers and even MSME industry and domestic producers, they have a stand against FTAs. They oppose free trade agreements. In fact, this was the reason why India quit RCEP negotiations a few years ago. India was supposed to be a part of the world's largest FTA, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. But due to these concerns raised by domestic producers, manufacturers and farmers, the Modi government decided to quit RCEP negotiations, and India has not joined the RCEP free trade agreement. But however, the demand that we should quit all FTAs and ban any future FTAs is unreasonable, because right now the government is prioritizing FTAs. We have recently signed trade agreements with UAE, which we studied yesterday. We have signed a limited trade agreement with Australia recently. We are negotiating FTAs with many countries and groupings, from United Kingdom to Australia to European Union. We are negotiating a number of FTAs, and it's a priority for the government to boost trade, to boost the flow of goods, services and investments. And the demand that India should withdraw from WTO, again, is highly unreasonable, because this is a multilateral platform that is providing for a level playing field with regard to global trade. As much as we have issues with WTO and how developed countries target developing nations at WTO, it is still a great platform for India, for a developing nation like India, to protect its trade and economic interests against the monopolistic policies and the outlook of the developed nations. When it comes to intellectual property rights or even agriculture related issues, subsidies, etc., WTO is a platform on which India relies heavily. It allows us the option to dispute unfair trade practices, levy certain duties like anti-dumping duties to counter the practice of dumping. Especially countries like China, they're known to dump their products on the Indian economy, and India protects the domestic industry by levying anti-dumping duties. This is recognized under WTO, right? Then yesterday we were talking about how India is a major hub of generic medicines and how India can issue a compulsory license as per WTO norms to even produce generic versions of patented drugs, right? All of this is possible because India is a member of WTO. It allows us to challenge the discriminatory policies, trade policies of other countries as well. So there's no question of India withdrawing from WTO. This is a unreasonable demand, and it can never be met. But that is what some of the farmer organizations want. Next, farmers are also demanding pension to farmers and farm laborers. This is something the government can consider. Of course, it would increase the financial burden, but given the risks that farmers face, there is no certainty with regard to their crops, with the income, right? And after a certain age, they won't be left with any savings or any income to sustain their families, right? So the demand for a pension for farmers and farm laborers is reasonable, but again, it's about financial viability. Can the government meet the demand and deliver pension for all farmers? So financially, it seems unviable, it seems unreasonable, but as a demand, it has some validity and the government might examine this. Coming to demand number 8, they want the Electricity Amendment Bill 2020 to be entirely scrapped, because this amendment led to the increase of power tariffs, which has increased electricity bills for farmers. right? Because farmers depend on mechanized equipment, right? For water pumps and for many other agricultural activities, they do rely on mechanized equipment, electricity, right? The pumps have to be powered with electricity. So the increased power tariff has increased the burden on farmers. Agricultural input cost has gone up. So they want the amendment to be scrapped and the power tariffs to be brought down. Then they want further upgradation of the Manrega scheme. As you know, Manrega has been a lifesaver in rural areas. It guarantees 100 days of minimum work for which the farmers and the rural employers, laborers, they are paid a minimum wage. This has put cash directly into the hands of the rural community. It has helped sustain demand as well in rural economy. But however, right now farmers are demanding that the number of work days should be increased to 200. They want this to be doubled with a daily minimum wage of 700 rupees. So the Modi government on one hand is facing criticism that it has been reducing the allocation for Manrega. Over the last few years, Manrega budgetary allocation has gone down quite significantly, and farmers are not happy with it because this is like a safety net. During years when monsoons will fail or the crops will fail, this was always seen as a safety net for farmers because they could take up manual labor at the local level and contribute to asset creation for which they would get paid, right? A minimum wage would be paid. Some states have given above the minimum wage as well, and it would guarantee 100 days of paid work. So now farmers want this to be doubled to 200 days with a major increase in the minimum wage, the daily wage rate. Then coming to demand 10, 11 and 12, they want the government to impose strict penalties on those agri companies, right, which are producing poor quality seeds, fertilizers and other inputs. This is a legitimate concern of the farmers. There are several industries, factories and companies in India which are involved in producing fertilizers, seeds and other agricultural inputs. But in many cases, the quality is a concern. In many cases, farmers have lost out on entire cropping seasons because of poor quality seeds that are supplied by some of these companies. Some of the companies have a monopolistic control over the market as well. There have been incidents where fake seeds have been supplied with fake promises that the productivity will increase. Even with regard to fertilizers and even pesticides, right? Farmers face many challenges. Sometimes they are too expensive, farmers are not able to afford them, right? Or they are not as effective as they are promised, quality has been compromised. So farmers want the government to act strictly against such companies and levy strict penalties on them. Then they want the government to promote the production of spices, particularly chili, turmeric and few others, and they want a national commission to be set up for this purpose. Just like the government gives special focus and attention to certain commercial crops, right? They want dedicated focus on few spices, particularly chili, turmeric and few others. They want a national commission to be established for this. And finally, they want the rights of indigenous communities to be protected. Their right over land, water, etc. They want this to be protected because it's alleged that tribal land is often exploited by industries and by private enterprises. So they want the agricultural land, the forest land, and even water belonging to indigenous communities to be protected. And these are the 12 demands raised by the farmers. So as we discussed, some of the demands are reasonable, some are highly unreasonable and can never be met. That is exactly what the editorial is also arguing. The editorial agrees that certain demands are unreasonable, like India withdrawing from WTO or staying away from all free trade agreements. That's not possible. There are bigger interests at play, and India can never deliver on those commitments. Even with regard to legally guaranteed MSP, or even with regard to farmers' pension, or increasing the allocation for Manrega scheme, right? Even this could be financially unviable, which could increase the burden on the government, right? So the government needs to adopt the path of consensus according to the editorial. The editorial takes a very balanced stand. It's neither backing the government entirely nor backing the farmers entirely, right? Of course, there are core issues highlighted with the farmers' protests. They do have genuine grievances and concerns which have never been addressed. In fact, from decades, these are the problems, the challenges plaguing Indian agriculture. And the whole impact has been borne by our farmers. So the demands they are bringing up, at least some of them, are definitely valid, definitely genuine. So if this has to be resolved, there has to be political will on the part of the government to concede to some of the demands. So here the editorial criticizes the aggressive approach of the government. As we discussed, the government has suspended mobile and internet services. It has imposed a complete blockade around the national capital, deployed heavy security forces, and very aggressive security measures have been taken up. There have been violent clashes already. In the previous round of farmers' protests, we saw that many farmers lost their lives. So the editorial is against such aggressive methods and tactics. It is urging the government to reach out to the farmers, talk to them, and achieve consensus. Of course, there is another angle to this, which is brought out by the editorial as well. There are questions being raised regarding these farmers' protests as to why it is happening now, just few months away from national elections. So the argument is that there is a political motive, that these protests are motivated politically, right? So editorial acknowledges that as well, that yes, the timing is a little concerning, but despite that, you can't ignore the genuine grievances and demands that farmers have brought up. So the only way forward is to drop the hostility. The government is reaching out, in fact, some top government ministers, right? They have been asked by the government to approach the farmers, meet with the leaders of the protests and negotiate with them. So the government is engaging with them, but the concern raised by the editorial is about the aggressive methods, the tactics which is being used. So this is what we should understand about the farmers' protest which is underway in the country and these important articles that we have in today's newspaper. Now moving on, we have another important column on the same page written by Gopal Krishna Gandhi. Gopal Krishna Gandhi is a former governor of the state of West Bengal, and interestingly, he is also the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. C. Rajgopalachari. So Gopal Krishna Gandhi talks about the current standoff between office of governor and the state governments, especially with regard to Tamil Nadu. Now, this is a topic which we have been examining over the last few days. Recently, we discussed that in the state of Tamil Nadu, Governor R.N. Ravi refused to read the customary address in front of the Legislative Assembly, and he even walked out from the customary address. So the writer is focusing on this standoff that we are seeing not just in Tamil Nadu but in general between the office of governor and the state governments. There have been many accusations that the office of the governor is being misused for political reasons by the ruling party at the center. Quite often it's alleged that the governor is a political agent, a political appointee of the center. If you look at the true purpose of the governor's office as envisioned by our constitution makers, the office of the governor was supposed to be a nominal authority, right, acting as a link between center and state to provide for smooth federal relations. But every now and then, we have noticed that the ruling parties at the center have blatantly misused the office of the governor for various political reasons. The main concern is about the powers of the governor with regard to granting assent to bills passed by the assembly. That is one major concern. There have been instances where governors have withheld their assent even after bills have been passed by elected legislative assemblies. So this brings up the question whether people's mandate should be respected, or should one executive nominal authority have the authority to block these bills passed by the elected assembly. The legislative assembly has the full mandate of the electorate. The elected government has the full mandate of the electorate. So the question is, how can one office, one constitutional authority can block and withhold these bills? There have been instances where governors, they exercise a considerable delay in granting assent. They withhold the bills and refer it to the president as well, as per the constitutional provisions. And this leads to a direct standoff between the office of the governor and the state government. Apart from that, there have been concerns about governors misusing Article 356 that deals with president's rule. or how governors have behaved when it comes to a hung assembly, when it comes to government formation or toppling of governments through defection. So in all these instances, we have seen that, especially when it comes to imposition of president's rule, the governor has a tremendous authority, a discretionary power to recommend to the president that president's rule has become necessary, citing that constitutional machinery has broken down in the state. So there are allegations that these powers have been misused in the past. Then the other source of controversy is the customary address. The customary address provided under Article 176 of the Constitution. There is a similar provision for the President of India as well, which is Article 87. Under Article 87, the President of India also delivers a similar customary address to a joint sitting of both the houses of the Parliament. Right? This is done at the start of the first session of each year, which is before the budget session, and also after the elections, when the new Lok Sabha is constituted, right? When the first session takes place after the elections. So both the houses are brought together in a joint sitting, and the president also delivers this customary address. Now, this article is specifically focusing on the customary address, its relevance, its validity, and why it is becoming a source of conflict between the state governments and the center. Right? When I say center, I'm referring to the office of the governor. See, this customary address, which is provided under Article 87, Article 176, respectively, for the president and the governor. This essentially is a colonial tradition. It's a tradition borrowed from the British parliamentary system. Even today in Britain, there is a similar practice where the monarch, previously it was Her Majesty and now the King, right? They also read out a customary address in front of the British Parliament, right? But the address is actually prepared by the government, by the executive. The job of the nominal executive, be it the president or the governor, is to simply read out this document. So in Britain as well, there is a very similar practice where the monarch reads out the address provided by the government. The government would have prepared it and the monarch simply reads it out. Now, what is the purpose of this address? The primary purpose of the customary address before the first session of a particular year or before a first session after the elections is to set out the agenda of the government, to highlight the legislative business that will be taken up in the coming session, in the coming year, or for the coming term of the government. Also, in India, governments have used the opportunity to highlight their achievements and even to discredit their opposition. Is that clear? The address has been used for a variety of purposes in India, be it at the center, be it at the state governments. This address, which is a very long speech, which is prepared by the government, approved by the Council of Ministers, it talks about the achievements of the ruling party. Many times it is exaggerated. It also tries to discredit previous governments and the political opposition. And they also set the legislative business for the coming session, for the coming year, and they lay out the government's legislative agenda for the coming term. So this is where the writer raises a question. See, of course, the president and governor, they're not bound entirely to simply read out what speech has been given to them. They do have the option to suggest changes. If they are unhappy with certain parts of the speech, be it the president under Article 87 or the governor under Article 176, right? They can suggest corrections and changes to be done before the speech is delivered by them on the floor of the House. In the past, many presidents have exercised this option, right? Usually what the governments do is they're very smart. The political class, right, in India, they're very smart. They deliberately delay the finalization of the speech till the very last minute. Let's say the address is tomorrow morning. They will send the speech to Rashtrapati Bhavan or to the Raj Bhavan respectively, right? Just the previous night. They only give few hours for the president or the governor to go through and understand what they are trying to project and highlight and suggest changes. There won't be enough time left. They deliberately create a time constraint. This has been a political ploy to ensure that presidents and governors don't suggest too many changes. But there have been instances where presidents, governors have gone through the entire text overnight. They have asked their officers to reach out to the government and carry out some changes if they are not happy with certain part of the text. And if the concerns are valid, of course, the government would be obligated to make those changes. So those changes have been done in the past. But in India, the governor says, unnecessarily, we are allowing this customary address to become a controversy and a dispute between the executive and the office of the governor. See, he says in Britain, this was just a custom, a tradition, right, which India inherited as well. But the way it is practiced in Britain and in India, there is a stark difference. In Britain, the speech delivered by the monarch, right, by the queen or the king, it is to the point. It focuses only on the legislative agenda, the legislative business for that particular session, for that particular year. In Britain, the speech doesn't focus on achievements. It doesn't focus on targeting the opponents. That is not done. It's a very short, well-prepared speech which only highlights the agenda, the legislative business in the coming days. So Gopal Krishna Gandhi, based on his experience as a governor, he was also an IAS officer. He has worked with a president many years ago. Right? So he has sufficient expertise in handling these issues as a former IAS officer as well. Right? So he suggests that we should curb the customary address. The customary address should be limited to setting the legislative business and the agenda, and government should not use this as an opportunity to highlight their own achievements, exaggerate them, or to target their political opponents. In Tamil Nadu, this was the issue. Governor R.N. Ravi refused to read out the rest of the speech and walked out because he believed that the speech was unnecessarily targeting the center and over-exaggerating the achievements of the state government. Now, this is something which could have been avoided entirely, right? You can't try to score political points while delivering a customary address which is mandated by the Constitution. So, in a way, R.N. Ravi had a right to express his displeasure about the problems that were there in the speech that was given to him. At the end of the day, be it a governor or a president, there's not simply robots to just read out the speech which has been given to them by the executive, right? They do have the authority to suggest changes, to even push the government to incorporate some changes, right? So the writer is suggesting, what if we remove this entirely, remove the inclusion of achievements, or don't misuse the customary address for political reasons. Instead of dragging it for hours and delivering spiel, pages and pages of speech, keep it limited, keep it very concise, and focus only on the legislative business and the agenda. And then no governor or even the president will have a problem in reading out the customary speech. So this is something that is done in Britain. In Britain, even though this is a practice which is owed to Britain's parliamentary system, so there the system is fine-tuned. They don't read out prolonged speeches. The Majesty is not asked to read out prolonged speeches. The government ensures that it's a very precise text, doesn't include any unnecessary bragging about the government or targeting of the opposition. They don't do that. They just focus on the legislative business, the agenda. It's a very short speech and the monarch delivers it, and that's it. Never becomes a controversy. So given how important it is to maintain smooth federal relations and how important the office of the governor is, the writer says this is entirely avoidable in India. We can avoid these controversies altogether. So he says that there is a need both for center and state governments to ensure that the customary speech given to the president and the governor respectively should be free from political references. Government should not misuse this opportunity to exaggerate their own achievements or to target their opposition. Instead, keep it professional as mandated by the Constitution and just focus on the legislative business. Then no governor or president will have issues in reading out the speech. So that is the point we take away from this important column. Now coming to the last column from page number 6, this topic deals with menstruation and the topic of menstrual leaves and how it is connected to gender equality. Even yesterday, we had a small discussion on menstruation. We spoke about the potential for stem cells found in menstrual blood and how it can be used to revolutionize the medical industry, right? So there I mentioned that when it comes to menstruation, the topic of menstruation, there is a lot of social taboo, religious orthodoxy, superstition, and a lot of social stigma attached to periods or to menstrual cycles. Right? Women are often discriminated, ostracized. They are often mistreated as well as a result of these orthodox customs and superstitions. So here the writer is talking about the practice or the policy of providing menstrual leave to female employees in a workplace. Of late in India, many companies, especially the new age startups, the tech-based startups, they have started providing menstrual leave of 1 day or 2 days to their female employees. Because menstruation is a period, it's a time where the woman going through menstruation suffers from various psychological, physiological distress. But the experience is not the same for everyone. Some women sail through it, they don't experience much discomfort, but for some it's extremely excruciating. They suffer from hormonal changes, mood swings, to even severe abdominal cramps, exhaustion, nausea, so severe that they won't be even able to walk up and carry out with their day-to-day tasks. So it's on these grounds that several companies have provided menstrual leave, and there is a demand that this should be provided as a mandatory provision. There is a demand that government should include this as part of the labor policy and labor code, because there are certain countries which have mandated, legally mandatory, menstrual leave for female employees. So the writer here is examining this complex social issue. The writer says that, yes, menstruation is indeed a difficult time for any woman, at least for those 2-3 days, right? Definitely, the changes, the physical, physiological stress, the emotional stress definitely adds to it. But however, the experience of each woman varies. The experience, the way they've experienced periods or menstruation is dependent on each person, their physiology, their individual circumstances. The writer says if menstrual leave is made mandatory, or if this becomes the norm in the industry, this could actually hamper gender empowerment and gender equality. The writer is not completely against the policy of menstrual leave, but however, the writer is cautioning that if menstrual leave becomes the norm, let's say government were to mandate this, that every company, every factory, every industry should provide 1 or 2 days of leave every month, right? Then the writer says this will only further increase the social stigma. It will further lead to harassment of women at workplace, and it could also lead to discrimination against women at the workplace. And to support this argument, the writer has a solid example, a solid backing. She's talking about the policy followed in Japan. Japan is a highly industrialized economy, and since 70 years, Japan has a legally mandated menstrual leave for female employees. Is that clear? Female employees are eligible for a menstrual leave every month. But believe it or not, less than 1% of female employees actually make use of menstrual leave. 99% of female employees don't even make use of it. Even though the provision is there, they don't apply for menstrual leave. Why? Because in Japan, there is a lot of gender-based stereotyping. Now, if they were to take menstrual leave, the manager would get informed, some of their colleagues might get to know, right? So given the customs, the traditions, the stigma, the taboo around it, they might even face harassment. They might even face ridicule at workplace. This is a reality, especially in societies where there is a lot of gender-based stereotyping. And within Japan's work culture, there is a big gender gap. The male employees are always preferred, promoted, given good hikes and appraisals. But you can clearly see a discrimination against Japanese women workers. So women in Japan are very hesitant to take the menstrual leave because they fear that they will be left out, they'll be discriminated. Now imagine the employer might start thinking that if every month they are taking 1 or 2 days of leave, in a year they are taking 12 to 24 days of leave. So there could be a tendency amongst few companies to not hire women as much as possible, right? Or the gender-based stereotyping of roles could lead to a clear distinction between men and women. Even if they are doing the same role, the same task, they might get paid less. They might not get promotions, whereas men might move up the career ladder. So the social stigma, the taboos that exist will add on to it. Apart from the possibility of facing harassment, it could increase gender inequality at workplace, according to the writer. The writer is talking about the Global Gender Gap Report brought out by the World Economic Forum. On the gender gap report of the World Economic Forum, India has dropped a few positions, and so has Japan. Despite being a developed industrialized nation, Japan's ranking with regard to the gender gap has gone down very significantly. It's ranked somewhere in the range of 120s to 150s in the last few years. Japan ranks one of the worst when it comes to gender gap that exists in the society. So the writer's argument is that despite the provision of menstrual leave existing from 7 decades, it has not helped in women empowerment. It has not helped in bridging the gender gap in Japan. Japan stands as an example. In fact, Japan's ranking has gone down. Discrimination against women at workplace has increased. So then what's the point of providing menstrual leave, right? But the writer at the same time is not completely against the idea. The writer is suggesting that how about there is a better policy where based on circumstances, each woman can decide whether they should avail menstrual leave or not. She acknowledges the fact that the experience is different for every woman. It changes from person to person. Those who have no issues, those who sail through this time, right? They need not avail menstrual leave. Those who are uncomfortable in asking for it or in taking the menstrual leave, which is guaranteed to them, right? If they are uncomfortable with it, they need not be forced to take it. Only those who suffer from very serious conditions, right, who suffer from serious physiological and psychological stress, only they might be provided an option. But the policy should be ensured that it doesn't end up harming women in the long run, right? It could end up harming women's career trajectory itself. It could further increase gender gap and gender inequality and gender-based discrimination. So that is a point the writer is making with regard to the topic of menstrual leave and menstruation. So with this, I complete my discussion of all the big articles, and let's head towards the prelims section. We have 3 small articles today. One on page number 13 related to the ongoing farmers' protests. As I was mentioning, in parts of Punjab, Haryana and parts of Delhi, right, mobile and internet services, telecom and internet services has been completely banned. In fact, India has become quite notorious, quite infamous in this regard. India has become known as the ban capital of the world when it comes to mobile and internet bans. Compared to most of the countries, India stands out. That too being a democracy, right? India has earned a very infamous reputation that every now and then in some part of India, right, there are suspension of mobile and telecom services on the grounds of public emergency and public safety. Whenever there is the slightest risk to public safety, law and order, to security, immediately authorities invoke certain legal provisions that are available to ban mobile and telecom services and internet services, which basically cripples your freedom of speech under Article 19. Frequent suspension of internet on the grounds of law and order, public safety, emergency, security is seen as violation of Article 19. It is seen as assault on your freedom of speech and expression, right? So in this context as well, in the context of the latest farmers' protests, mobile internet services have been suspended for several hours in large parts of Punjab and Haryana, and even in parts of Delhi NCR region. Now, what is the legal basis for this order? Who can issue the order? What is the legal basis, the legal provision behind it? Let's understand this. See, usually these orders are issued by the state government, because according to the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution, which bifurcates the subjects into union list, state list and concurrent list, policing and law and order is a state subject. The subject of policing and public order or law and order, this is a state subject. So the state police, the state home department, they are responsible for maintaining law and order, to deal with public emergencies and to enforce public safety. So when there is a security threat or when there is a threat to law and order, it's the state government which often issues these orders to ban mobile telecom services for a certain period in a given region. These powers are provided under a colonial law, which is the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. Under the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, a set of rules have been notified. The temporary suspension of telecom services, public emergency or public safety rules, 2017. So through these rules notified in 2017, which is an updated version of these rules, which is provided under the Indian Telegraph Act, it is usually the state government that has the power to order the ban of mobile and telecom and internet services in a given region. All right. But however, this time there is something different. This time it's not the Punjab government or the Haryana government which has ordered the suspension of mobile and internet services under this provision. It is the Ministry of Home Affairs of the center. The central government has invoked the same provision, and MHA has ordered mobile internet companies to suspend the services until the situation normalizes. So these orders are issued on the grounds that there is an imminent threat to public safety and there is a public emergency that the security agencies are dealing with. So now the question here is, can center issue such orders? Because policing public safety is seen as a state subject. But of course, when it comes to the larger question of national security, then definitely center, the MHA, can exercise those powers when there is a threat to internal security. So currently these orders were issued by the MHA based on an intelligence input provided by the Intelligence Bureau. The IB, responsible for domestic intelligence, which tracks domestic threats, had issued an advisory to the MHA that the planned farmers' protests could lead to a security situation. So based on these inputs, the MHA has ordered the suspension of mobile internet services, and it has done this under the Temporary Suspension of Telecom Services, Public Emergency and Safety Rules of 2017, notified under Indian Telegraph Act. So who can issue these orders? These orders can be issued either by the Union Home Secretary, the Secretary to the Ministry of Home Affairs, right, if it is issued by the Union government, or if it is issued by the state government, it comes from the state's Home Secretary, who heads the State Home Department. So they can issue the orders depending on the public safety, public emergency situation. Now these orders are reviewed by a committee headed by the Cabinet Secretary within 5 days according to the rules. To provide for prevention of misuse of these provisions, to ensure that these provisions are not misused, right, by the government, there is a review mechanism, a mechanism of checks and balances has been provided, where these orders to ban mobile telecom services and internet services is reviewed by a committee headed by the Cabinet Secretary of India, the highest ranking civil servant. And this review is done within 5 days. So orders are issued either by Union Home Secretary or the State Home Secretary, and it is reviewed within 5 days by a committee headed by the Cabinet Secretary. So these are some provisions that you have to remember about the Indian Telegraph Act and the rules notified under it, through which mobile telecom internet services can be banned. Next, on page 16, we have an economy and polity related article. The article is referring to the 16th Finance Commission. Recently, the 16th Finance Commission has been constituted, right? The required appointments have been done by the President of India. And according to the article, the 16th Finance Commission has begun its work. It has started its consultations with various stakeholders. So let's quickly look at what is the Finance Commission, what is its mandate. The Finance Commission is a constitutional body established under Article 280 of the Indian Constitution. It is established once in every 5 years by the President of India. The President of India provides for the establishment of the Finance Commission once in every 5 years. All right, it is headed by a chairman, and there are 4 members appointed by the President. Kindly remember this very, very important point. So it's constituted once in every 5 years, appointed by the President. So there is a chairman of the Finance Commission and 4 members to assist the chairman. Now, what is the mandate? What is the role? The Constitution envisions a very important financial role for the Finance Commission. It is primarily responsible for devolution of funds. It has to come out with a formula, a recommendation to share the divisible pool of taxes. Because there are certain taxes levied by the center, levied by the state, collected by center and state. Right? If you look at indirect taxes like, let's say, GST, goods and services taxes, or other various taxes that are collected, there is a divisible pool of taxes which has to be devolved by the center. There is a horizontal devolution, there is a vertical devolution as well. So to decide this formula through which the center will divide the pool of taxes and share it with all the states, for that purpose, the Finance Commission is set up. That is the primary duty of the Finance Commission, to decide the devolution of funds. Second, to recommend the distribution of grants in aid that the center provides to the states under Article 275. Under Article 275, the center provides grants in aid. It provides grants to aid and assist the state, which is a financial support given by the center to the state. So to decide upon the principles governing grants in aid as per Article 275, Finance Commission comes out with recommendations. It also provides recommendations to consolidate and strengthen the consolidated fund of the states to ensure that adequate financial resources are available to panchayats and municipalities as per the recommendations of the State Finance Commission. Right? Panchayats and municipalities, which constitute the third tier of governance, which was set up through 73rd, 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. For them, it's very important to provide them adequate financial resources to ensure effective grassroots governance. So there is a State Finance Commission that was set up through the 73rd, 74th Constitutional Amendment, which provided for the establishment of Panchayat Raj institutions and municipalities. So there are certain recommendations of the State Finance Commission to provide these financial resources to these local bodies. So to supplement the consolidated fund of the state, to ensure that these grassroots institutions have enough financial resources, the Finance Commission will provide certain recommendations to ensure that the financial situation of the panchayats and municipalities is made better based on recommendations given by the State Finance Commission. Apart from that, any other matter could also be referred to it by the government. Of course, it's not a discretionary power of the president when it comes to setting up the Finance Commission. The president is simply bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So essentially, government decides, right, when the Finance Commission will be set up, who will be the chairman, who will be the members. So the names are forwarded to the president and president provides for the appointment. So the 16th Finance Commission has now been constituted and it is expected to provide its report by October 2025. And its recommendations will be implemented during this period, during this 5-year period from 2026 to 2031. All right. So apart from the regular mandate, a new terms of reference also has been added. The 16th Finance Commission will also look into financing disaster management initiatives as per the Disaster Management Act to decide upon the dispersal of funds meant for disaster management. There are funds provided under the Disaster Management Act. You have a National Disaster Response Fund. And the government is also supposed to set up a National Disaster Mitigation Fund. In India, the Mitigation Fund has not been set up, but there is the National Disaster Response Fund through which the resources of the State Disaster Response Fund is supplemented by the center. When a disaster strikes a state, right, to carry out emergency relief, rescue operations, to provide aid and assistance to the victims, the state will incur a lot of expenses, and this immediate expense for response operations is supplemented by the NDRF. So to decide upon the dispersal of funds from NDRF to SDRF and to finance these disaster management initiatives as planned under Disaster Management Act, it's the Finance Commission which provides the recommendations. This is a terms of reference that is added to the mandate of the Finance Commission. So this Finance Commission, the 16th Finance Commission, is headed by the former Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Arvind Panagaria, and under his chairmanship, there are 4 other members, 3 full-time and 1 part-time member have been appointed. So it was recently constituted just a few weeks back, and it has already started its work to consult with all stakeholders, and by next year it will submit its report, based on which the devolution of funds will be decided for the next 5-year period. Coming to the last article from the Science and Technology section in the Science and Tech supplement of the online edition of the Hindu, there is a very important species that has been mentioned. So this is relevant for environment and ecology and even science and technology. This article is referring to the horseshoe crab, which you can see here in the image. Horseshoe crab is also referred to as living fossils because this is one of the oldest living creatures known to us. This particular species, right, they have remained on Earth as it is for almost 450 million years. They have not undergone changes, they haven't faced any existential threat until now, and these are some of the oldest species alive. So they are considered as living fossils. So studying them is crucial to understand evolution itself. So horseshoe crab is not exactly a crab. In fact, they are marine arthropods. They are very closely related to scorpions, spiders, etc. It's an arthropod. It belongs to the insect family, the arthropod family. And I think the structure, the appearance also makes it very clear. Right? It's not your regular crab, a marine crab that you find, or a river crab. Right? It's only called a horseshoe crab because of the shape, the structure it has, but it more resembles a scorpion or a spider, and it falls into the category of marine arthropods. Now, why are these species, why is this species so important? This particular species plays a key role in the ecosystem, in the marine ecosystem. They are usually found in intertidal zones, particularly in United States and in some parts of the Pacific, Atlantic, and in the Indian Ocean as well. So there are different subspecies of horseshoe crabs, and today they are facing a great risk. Their numbers are depleting rapidly, right? Because they are threatened by extensive commercial exploitation. They are heavily harvested, exploited in the biomedical industry. By the pharmaceutical biomedical industry, they are heavily overexploited. Plus, they are also facing the risk of hunting and poaching, the challenges posed by climate change, global warming, rising sea levels, habitat destruction. So all these threats, they already pose an existential threat to the species. Upon that, the overexploitation, the commercial exploitation of horseshoe crabs, especially in the US, by the biomedical pharma industry, is a very, very significant risk. Now the question is, why is this species used in the pharma and biomedical industry? See, the horseshoe crab has a very unique blood. It's a blue colored blood which is drawn by the pharmaceutical industry, and it contains bacterial endotoxins. It contains a clotting agent which is very important to test drugs, medical devices, etc. for bacterial endotoxins. So this blood of horseshoe crabs is widely sought out in the pharma industry and biotech industry. Is that clear? So previously the horseshoe crabs were killed for it, but now in the US there are very strict regulations. The pharma industry, when they are commercially harvesting them, they can't kill the horseshoe crabs. They just have to extract a certain amount of blood which is legally allowed. There is a strict regulation for it, and they have to release the animal alive into the sea. But however, studies by environmental activists in the US has shown that even though the extraction of blood is regulated to a certain quantity, and even though the companies are prohibited from harming their life, still these species of marine arthropods are under great risk, because after the blood is extracted from them, they become more vulnerable, prone to various challenges, and eventually most horseshoe crabs are dying out. They are getting driven towards extinction. This could upset the whole food chain as well that is dependent on it. It plays a critical role in the shore-based food chain. There are many birds which predate, which are predatory, which prey on them, right? And there is an entire ecosystem that's dependent on this particular species. So right now, according to IUCN on the red list, only the American horseshoe crab is listed as vulnerable. It's a threatened species. Then the tri-spine horseshoe crab, which is a subspecies, is listed as endangered. The other variants which are found, they are not threatened species as of now because the data is not enough. It's categorized as data deficient. Enough data is not available to categorize them whether they are threatened species or not. So IUCN has categorized the American horseshoe crab as vulnerable, the tri-spine horseshoe crab as endangered. So there is growing demand in the US by environmental activists and researchers to consider the American horseshoe crab as an endangered species. That will give it a higher degree of protection, legal protection, which could tackle hunting, poaching, and the large-scale commercial overexploitation of this important species. So there can be a possible question in your prelims based on horseshoe crabs, which are considered as living fossils. So with this, I bring my discussion to an end. Please make a note of the subscription plan that we are offering. There is a flat 50% discount being provided for a limited period till 17th of Feb. And once you subscribe, the best part is you get access to all the courses, be it our exclusive English medium course or even to Hindi, English, bilingual courses that are available. So please take a look at this. And finally, you can go through the mains practice questions. Just pause the screen for a second, go through the questions and use them for your answer writing practice. So with this, I bring my discussion to an end for today. I hope you guys have liked it. I hope you have understood everything that we have discussed. So that's it for today. If you like the session, do press the like button and share your comments and subscribe to the channel. So I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.